This is Racing Across America with Seth Merrow. Welcome back to Racing Across America. Wednesday morning means a visit from Jeremy Plonk. Happy to be plugged back in with Jeremy, horseplayernow.com and Night School, because last week we were off for Christmas Eve, so we missed him. Jeremy, good morning. How was your holiday?
It was wonderful, and sorry to miss you on Christmas Eve, but at least Santa didn't miss the house yet. So
there you go. Very good, and I'm sure your little girl really appreciated that because I think she's at an age where Christmas is very special for everybody, but there's certain ages where it's even more special, so I'm sure she really appreciated it. Nice racing over the weekend, certainly the holiday weekend. We kicked back in with Santa Anita, got back to the races with Aqueduct, but then there was some interesting stakes races around the country as well that we will touch on. But because, of course, Countdown to the Crown is going to be kicking off in a couple more weeks, or, geez, we're right around the corner now, less than that. So Countdown to the Crown, start to look at the three-year-old season for 2015. But earlier this year, that was certainly our concentration, and that was kind of a theme this weekend with the Malibu out in Southern California, Grade 1 event. Shared Belief wins. So I thought we'd talk a little three-year-olds, but kick it off with that Malibu. Just get your thoughts on Shared Belief in that race. This is going back again to opening day at Santa Anita. Grade 1, $300,000, 7 furlongs. We'll watch the stretch run. It will be number 8, Shared Belief, at 1-2, but has to work. And I said it, we talked about this race at the beginning of the week. Mark Casse, obviously he's a high percentage, he's a great trainer, but over the past couple of months, boy, I just think he's been phenomenal. And Mark Casse's number 1, Conquest 2-step, really gives Shared Belief all he can handle at 72-1. So it's going to be a nice ding-dong stretch duel here. She Too, who I thought was kind of interesting in this race, winds up running 3rd, Indianapolis 4th. What were your thoughts on Shared Belief this past Friday?
I like the way that he won the race because he showed some determination. He did something a little bit outside of the box from what he'd been doing, turning back to the sprint race. He beat some good short horses. I mean, Shitu is a talented horse, and for the top 2 to go by him at 7 furlongs, I thought was a good performance by both of them. We want horses to dominate anymore. We want our football teams to dominate. Florida State's won 7 games by 6 points or less this year, and everybody says they're not as good as they were last year, but they find a way to win. So there's an admirable quality about that that we kind of dismiss in today's society, that we want blowouts. We want everybody to look impressive every single time out. And that's just not the case, and that's just not reality, that you can go out and blow out the competition all the time. So if you want to knock Shared Belief to the margin of victory in this race, I don't buy that argument. I think it's a good thing to see horses, one, the ability to blow out fields when the situation arises. That's a plus. And then the ability to win a dogfight when that's the situation presented as well. So he's done it all, and he's had a great year. The fun thing about this year's 3-year-old crop set is 1 year ago at this time, Shared Belief was really cementing his 2-year-old championship. He ran all the way through December at the end of the year at Hollywood. And then the beginning of the year, there was really, horses like Bayern kind of rose on the scene, and California Chrome ran early in the year in that Cow Cup Derby race against Tamarando. These horses went all the way through November and December, and we had a really interesting run of 3-year-olds this year in the longevity that they showed. I know it's not the era where horses are going to run 9, 10, 11, 12 times a year, but when they stretch out for the entire season, and the same good horses you're talking about a lot of times at the beginning of the year are still the good ones at the end of the year, that's a fascinating group of 3-year-olds, and I think we had that this year.
Yeah, and let's now fold in because, again, the Countdown to the Crown was a real focus for us, having you on every week through the Triple Crown series. So let's just fold in the 3-year-old crop in general as we now can look back and really see what we had this year. And I'll tell the guys in the control room they can just rack these up and roll them as we talk because we have the stretch run of the Breeders' Cup Classic. We will watch Bayern win. Toast of New York runs 2nd. California Chrome 3rd. Shared Belief, of course, with the trouble, runs 4th in here. Tonalist runs 5th in the Breeders' Cup Classic. So we'll get a look at some of the top 3-year-olds in the Breeders' Cup Classic just from early last month. And then after that, they're going to go back to the Kentucky Derby, and we'll watch California Chrome get it done in the Kentucky Derby. And some names that were prominent earlier this year, Commanding Curve runs 2nd in that race, Danza 3rd, and of course Wicked Strong 4th in the Kentucky Derby. It was a year that we had a chance at a Triple Crown. I think by the time the Triple Crown was over, we weren't quite sure what to make of the 3-year-olds. But boy, as we got into fall and they stepped up against older, and that older division fell apart a little bit, the 3-year-olds started to look very good. I'll toss some other names in there. Tapiture, V.E. Day, of course, the winner of the Travers. Really, really nice season for the 3-year-olds. Overall, what are your thoughts looking back?
I think it was an excellent group of 3-year-olds this year. The Candy Boys. I mean, these are nice horses of depth that are going to be good handicap horses in the future on the West Coast, and horses like V.E. Day on the East Coast. Constitution coming back. I mean, he didn't quite come back as strong as we thought he might, but I think he's the kind of horse that can have a big meet at Gulfstream and be a horse like the Don Handicaps. And so this group of 3-year-olds is really good. And the nice thing about it is, it looks like it's relatively going to stay intact. There's a lot of these horses who are back in training now, or will be coming back into training to be 4-year-olds next year and the coming year, beginning tomorrow. So it's a good group. This group's a little bit reminiscent of what we saw with the Smarty Jones group, I think, back in 2004, when folks said, Smarty Jones, he won the Derby, he won the Preakness, he lost the Belmont because he couldn't run that far and he didn't have the pedigree. It really was kind of a weak crop. And then we find out Borrego just wins everything as a 4-year-old. Rock Hard 10, Eddington, these horses dominated everything as 4- and 5-year-olds, then moving on. And we learned that this was a really good crop of 3-year-olds that Smarty Jones had taken on back in 2004. So I think we're looking at something similar where, it wasn't that glamour boy horse who won the Kentucky Derby. Yes, he was favored in California Chrome, but the Blue Bloods weren't tied to him when he crossed the wire. They were all looking for a way to beat him another time down the road and say that he was just beating up on a weak crop. I think this 3-year-old group proved throughout the rest of the year that it wasn't a weak crop, and I think they're going to be reminiscent of what we saw in 04 turning into 05, that the Eddingtons, Rock Hard 10s, Borregos. You're going to see a lot of these horses from this year win those races, like next year's Pacific Classic, Santa Anita Handicap, the Don Handicap. I think they're going to be the horses to beat in a lot of those races.
Yeah, I agree. I think the last 3 months has really set up a really nice 2015 in the older division as the calendar turns and these become 4-year-olds. But let's stick with 3-year-olds. I want to get your take on what happened last Friday and how that may apply to the Eclipse picture, because right after it, as I was putting together the Equidaily page, I found 2 or 3 pundits out there, pieces in newspapers that said after the Malibu shared belief had reinserted himself into the Eclipse picture. You can't knock the year he's had. I just wonder, that Malibu is always so late on the calendar. I think for a lot of voters, unfortunately, because it's a grade 1 event and it should be considered, but I think a lot of voters that late in the year it goes a little bit under the radar. And I know you have been on California Chrome's bandwagon now as far as year-end honors for quite a while. Did anything change up for you on Friday?
No, and you know what? One, I'm not a voter. I'm not a member of the National Surf Riders, so I don't have a say in the battle. And I just think with 3-year-olds, you don't go to the end of the year to determine who was the champion 3-year-old. We have championship races in the 3-year-old division. They're called the Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont, and there's 3 races that every single trainer in America is trying to win. The 3-year-old championship is decided by June. Now, if you've got kind of a split division in a year where they're kind of, juggled a little bit, then maybe you extend it out to the Travers and say this is where Bet Twice and Ali Sheba can settle it, or something along those lines. We didn't have that this year. I mean, California Chrome, to me, what he did in that 4-race run from the San Felipe, Santa Anita Derby, Preakness, Belmont, he did historic things. He's the 3rd horse in history to win those 4 races in succession. The others, were Sunday Silence and Affirmed. I mean, he's in rare air by winning those 4 races. To me, the fact that he didn't pull a War Emblem and run, way up the track in the Belmont, he got beat in the Belmont, but he didn't get beat far in the Belmont, and he ran a good race. To me, the 3-year-old discussion was over at that point. Now, if you want to talk horse of the year, that does extend to me to the end of the year. And if you want to say that main sequence gets into the horse of the year discussion, I have no argument with that whatsoever. I think that's a fair debate, and I think that's something that that sound and reasonable people can discuss. But to me, congratulations, you won the Malibu. But to me, the Malibu isn't part of a champion 3-year-old discussion, just in my mind. I mean, trust me, if Jerry Hollendorfer could trade you 5 Malibus for a Preakness or a Derby, he would have. And so Shared Belief wasn't developed enough physically and recovered enough at that time to be a factor in the spring. And while you might say, well, that's a shame and it wasn't his fault, that's just the reality of it. I mean, the Preakness determines the champion 3-year-old. I believe it's something along the lines of 16 of the last 17 years that the champion 3-year-old has been a horse who's emerged out of the Preakness. And I think you're looking at, California Chrome easily won the Preakness, on the back end. They were gaining on him just a little bit right on Curlin, but he was as comfortable in the stretch in that race as he was on Derby Day. And to me, it was over at that point, unless something happened like a horse parlayed the Belmont into something really big the rest of the year. Unfortunately for Tonalist, I don't think that his rest of the year was big enough to unseat what we saw the first 6 months out of California Chrome. But if you want to talk Horse of the Year and you don't vote California Chrome Horse of the Year, I have no problem with that at all.
Well, let me ask you, would Shared Belief go into that Horse of the Year picture? If you toss in Pacific Classic, awesome again, could he be considered if somebody is sitting there saying California Chrome, as you say, he's kind of showed things up through the Triple Crown season, can you then kind of leapfrog him for a Horse of the Year with Shared Belief? Or once you've looked at the 3-year-old division and made your decision there, you can't juggle things up and go for another horse for Horse of the Year?
Well, you know what? It's voting. It's subjective, and you're trying to honor horses that you think have been exceptional in the year. And if you think that is a valid argument, you could even say Byron. Okay, he came on at the end of the year and won the Breeders' Cup Classic, and that was the race, And so I wouldn't have a major problem with that, really. I mean, because, to me, if you're ranking the 3-year-old, it's about the 3-year-old races that everybody wants to win. So, that's off the wall. I don't think you'll find a lot of people conventionally who would agree with that, but I don't think that that's that ridiculous. I mean, look, there are years when things are a little bit split up. I mean, do you want to make Wise Dan the champion turf horse, but not the, he's champion older male, but maybe not champion turf horse because we have somebody else in the long turf division that we would rather, make champion turf horse than a miler, but we want to make Wise Dan champion older male. There's a couple ways you can kind of massage the categories and give everybody a trophy, as we like to do, in our current society. But I wouldn't be opposed to that. I mean, look, if you think the horse who had the best year, January to December, was Shared Belief, then make him Horse of the Year. I don't have a problem with that. I just can't see winning the Derby, the Preakness, the Hollywood Derby, even at the end of the year. You might throw that on as a little bit of icing, but to me, if you remember 2014, was this the year for California Chrome for 3-year-olds, or was this the year for Shared Belief? 10 years from now, nobody's going to even remember Shared Belief was a class of 2014. They're going to remember he's a great horse, but he's not going to be inherently tied to this year. The horse who's inherently tied to 2014, when you think back, who was the horse I thought about in 2014, it's going to be California Chrome because what he did in the Triple Crown.
Yeah, that's funny. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think you're exactly right. 2 or 3 years down the road, I don't even know if you have to go out 10, but you look back and California Chrome will resonate a little bit more. That's an interesting take. All right, let's take a look now at some of the other stakes action from the weekend, because I wanted to go back to some of the 2-year-old races. And I said earlier, Countdown to the Crown a couple of weeks, and then I remembered, it's New Year's Eve. Countdown to the Crown's probably right around the corner, the first edition, right?
The countdown is 3 days.
There you go.
Our preseason annual magazine comes out the first Friday of the new year, and it's free and digital, and you can download it. Go to horseplayernow.com or countdowntothecrown.com. Beginning this Friday, we're tying up some loose ends right now. It's more than 140 pages. Great previews of every single prep race along the trail this year. Our big list of horses to watch and how you kind of weigh the contenders against each other, and a little analysis of the pedigrees of more than 400 horses who are turning 3 years old tomorrow. So we've got a great free product out there. It's presented by the Preakness Stakes and Express Bets. We thank them for their help in getting this publication out free to the public, and it'll be ready to go. And then the weekly column and scouting report begins the following Friday. So on January 9th, we start the weekly. But on the second here, coming up this Friday, the publication will be out, the Countdown to the Crown preseason annual magazine. So looking forward to that. We're kind of holding out. There's a couple races even today and between now and Friday that could get a horse or two under the list. So we'll publish right up against the deadline.
Nice, and looking forward to that. That'll certainly give us some good conversation over the next few months on Wednesdays. And again, every Friday, horseplayernow.com, the Countdown to the Crown package, providing great information throughout the Triple Crown Series on the 3-year-olds. And again, we're going to take a look at some of the 2-year-old action from this past weekend and have some thoughts there. A couple of them were restricted, so I'll be interested to see if you think these horses can move out against Open Company. But first up, we do have an Open Company race going back last Saturday to Tampa Bay Downs, the Pasco, for $100,000. Again, these are, of course, 2-year-olds going 7 furlongs. And the number 4, Catalina Red, just gets up and gets it done as a 3-5 favorite over the second choice at 2-1, XY Jet. California Chrome, Catalina Red. Catalina Red now 2 for 2 at Tampa Bay. And that's my concern about this one, Jeremy. Certainly a couple of nice races at Tampa, but that Tampa track can be a little quirky. So, there's a 3-year-old series at Tampa, and if this one sticks around, you have to pay attention. But when this one moves away from Tampa, I'll start to be a little more concerned. But again, we're going to watch number 4, Catalina Red, Daniel Centino on board, just get up this weekend in the Pasco. Notably, this was a track record as well. What are your thoughts on this one?
He's a good sprinter, and he's good right now. And so he's kind of got that developmental edge. He was wheeling back on pretty short rest. I want to say he was coming back on 3 weeks rest from another win over the track there at Tampa. And he's doing really well for Chad Stewart, leading rider aboard and a fast time. But he's bred to sprint. And I don't think you're going to see Catalina Red develop into one of those horses for the Tampa Bay Derby per se. But he might be a horse who ends up on the other side of the coast. For something like the Swale and the Spectacular Bid and some of the sprint races that we see at Gulfstream Park. So I think he's really good now. He's not the kind of horse that by May you're going to see going 10 furlongs, though. So nice performance here, and it kind of gets our appetite whetted a little bit. But he's a good horse, when you're evaluating, he's on our big list, for instance. When I said we have more than 400 horses that we've evaluated, because I want somebody to go back and look at this race someday and say, okay, he ran against Catalina Red. Who's that? How good was this performance? This horse was third to Catalina Red, and you'll be able to kind of identify them as they're on our list. And we'll note that this is a really good horse who's in form now, but probably won't route. So maybe you won't take Catalina Red on the stretch out now based on how you see him on our big list in the Countdown to the Crown magazine. And that's kind of the way we use it to kind of give ourselves a scouting report on each of these horses. But I don't look at him as a Derby prospect.
All right, let's move on to Laurel this past weekend. The Maryland Juvenile Futurity. Obviously, as the name indicates, this is limited to Maryland breds. $125,000 on the line, and they're going 7 furlongs. But as I say, want to get an idea if you think this horse will step out against Open Company. Now, the winner, Ghost Bay, has faced Open Company in the first couple of starts, but there were a couple of third-place finishes. So makes the stakes debut as a maiden and gets it done this past weekend. Ghost Bay will be the number 7 under Forrest Boyce, who liked this horse enough to come up from New Orleans, where she's based this winter. 7 gets it done on top. Number 10, Gin Fuzz, runs second. And a horse I thought was interesting in the second career start for George Weaver, Sunrise Sunset, will run third at 7-2. Also 7-2 is the winner in here. But it's Ghost Bay, third career start, stretching out to 7 after a couple of 6 furlong races to begin the career. Runs off and kind of hides from this bunch late. What do you think of Ghost Bay going forward?
I like Ghost Bay. This is a horse. Larry Murray's a good trainer. He's trained for the Benders there in Maryland for years. Has almost been a house trainer for them. And this horse wanted more distance. I picked him in the race despite his maiden status. He wants to run on more. He's a ghost staffer. He's got some stamina on the dam side of the pedigree. A little bit more distance in the Maryland Juvenile, and even more distance down the road is going to help him. I think you're going to see this horse at Aqueduct in the winter. I think he's going to, the Maryland series, there's a race called the Marylander early in this campaign, and there's the private terms a little bit later at Laurel in the spring. He could stay along that local path in the Federico Tessio and try to be kind of a Preakness type. But I think with these good horses that you see in the Mid-Atlantic this time of year, they're more apt to show up at Aqueduct. The Jerome's going to kick off the series this weekend, but then there's, the races leading up through into the Gotham and into the Wood. And I think you're going to see this horse get a shot in the Withers, perhaps, up in New York later in the spring here, or later in the winter. I think he's the kind of horse who's going to deserve a chance to get out of the Mid-Atlantic. And he's got some talent, He ran, like you said, he had a couple placings in those shorter races, but those were against pretty good horses, and horses that I think match up fairly well from the Laurel scene. So I think he's a pretty nice horse, and he's in good hands. Larry Murray's a good trainer.
Yeah, I agree. I think he was kind of interesting in the way he won the other day. Looked very, very good. And now one that I'm not quite as convinced about on Sunday at Aqueduct, the New York Stallion Series. Again, obviously this is a restricted stakes race, but we'll watch the number 7 Chasing Bubbles get it done at 16 to 1. And the price was no surprise. This is a horse that in 5 career starts prior had tried maiden special, state bred maiden special weight company a couple of times and thrown in 2 real duds. Had run much better against maiden claiming state breds, and in fact it broke the maiden just prior for a $40,000 state bred maiden tag. So that 16 to 1 made sense, stepping into a little tougher company for a $150,000 New York Sire Stakes purse. But it will be the number 7 Chasing Bubbles upsetting here. I think between the top 2, the number 3, who was favored at 1 to 2, Disco Partner. Only the second career start, Disco Partner winds up running second in here. He'll be the number 3 horse. You know, a length and a half behind the winner, but going forward, if I was choosing between the 2, I think I'd tilt a little more to Disco Partner, although I don't know whether either of these are going to be jumping out and knocking heads with open company successfully. What do you think?
No, I agree with you there. I mean, it was a slow time, and it wasn't the strongest field. And Chasing Bubbles and Disco Partner might be a good combination to box tonight on New Year's Eve, but I don't know that we'll be looking at them down the line as being big-time contenders. You know, Kenny McPeak brought this one up, you know, to New York because it's a New York bred and to run for the money. The one lesson to learn from this, and we always try to, you know, extract a little something in our night school program and give people angles and tips and things, is this was a horse who wasn't as competitive for maiden special weights and had to drop down to the maiden claiming ranks to get the win. But that's a confidence boost, and a lot of times it will move a horse forward, and they can re-rise in class off of that maiden claimer. Just because a trainer dropped the horse in for maiden claiming doesn't mean they gave up on him or trying to unload him. A lot of times with a young horse, you're trying to get away with something there of, look, let's get him down and get a little bit easier, get his confidence boosted, and try to teach him how to win a race and, you know, what it feels like to win a race. And so, you know, you can see those kind of horses re-rise in class. Now, do you want to take them out of maiden claiming rising into stakes races? Probably not, and that's why you saw the big odds that you did and the double-digit payoff. But if that horse, you know, say that a trainer drops horse in for maiden claiming and then rises back up into an allowance race, they're trying to protect that horse then. They don't want to lose them, and they could have that confidence boost. So it can be a good angle on the drop and re-rise, if you will, if you're looking to put something in your toolbox and handicapping act.